Because as we know, Israel tweeted a paraphrase of a Bible verse. The ARU threatened him, offered him money, and he lost his job. And it's going through the courts. Now, I'm not going to speak to the merits of the case because I don't have access to all that information. But what I find amusing is this. Point one, if the Australian Rugby Union just said nothing, it would have died. Nobody would have cared. But it's been alleged that Alan Joyce, chief executive of Qantas, might have influenced Rugby Australia's decision. Now, he has denied that, and that should be said. He has denied he has influenced Rugby Australia. But having said that, I don't believe Alan Joyce. I just don't trust him because something stinks. Now, what's funny about it is Folau goes out and gets a GoFundMe page, and within a day and a bit, he's got, I don't know, $750,000. GoFundMe pulls the plug. In less than 48 hours, it's over double that much to $2 million. I'm not even sure what it is now. It's probably well over $2 million. What that tells me is this, that some Australians could see the free speech angle in this and the Christians shouldn't be beaten. But the moment they pulled the plug, they realised what was going on. The grasshoppers were trying to crush the ants again. And so what happened was, the ants have said, hang on a minute, I don't like Folau and I don't like his religion, but if they're going to crush his rights, what about my rights? And all of a sudden they're starting to realise that the old story, I didn't speak up about these people, and then I didn't speak up about these people, and eventually they came for me and there was nobody to speak up for me. I think Australians are starting to link arms and turn on the grasshoppers and say, no, you don't. Now, here's one last point, a bit of a plug for the party. No political party is speaking on this except we, the Australian Conservatives, because we know exactly what's at stake here. And it's not a religious issue. It's got nothing to do with that. This is freedom of speech. And if you can't speak, you lose everything. Because I've lived and worked in countries that are police states where you say the wrong thing, you just disappear in the desert and don't come back. I'm not suggesting that's going to happen here, but it's going to be far more subtle. But the Conservatives are the only ones speaking up on the free speech issue. We did so well early in the piece, and we're still doing it now. Silence Scott Morrison, our Prime Minister. What did he say? Isn't this just revealing? I think this issue has had enough oxygen. Now, can you imagine the leader, as was recently put to me by a good friend of mine, the leader of the free world saying, oh, well, that's enough free speech. Ladies and gentlemen of Australia, you're going to find out that Scott Morrison believes in nothing. And he's just shown his hand. Silence Scott. He wants to say nothing about this because, well, I can't imagine why. But it's a good story, and I think it augurs well for Australia.
Now, would you make a distinct... so we talk about free speech. Free speech is, as far as... my idea of free speech is that you should be able to say basically whatever you want. Maybe incitements to violence is an exception, and you shouldn't go to jail, right? The government shouldn't come after you. But if I say something which is particularly disliked by, let's say, my employer, do you think you should have the right to keep your job or not?
That's a great question. Let's just touch on the incitement to violence thing, because what Folau said didn't incite anybody to violence. He was just expressing a belief, as opposed to behead all those that insult the prophet. Now, that gets a pass from everybody, including Silent Scott Morrison and Albanese. They say nothing about the Islamic threats to behead people. They get a pass. Why is that? So it's selective free speech, point number one. ABC, they're selective about free speech because they'll support somebody but not somebody else. So don't be confused. Don't believe that they're defending a point of principle. They're not. They're protecting their own backsides. That's point number one. They're deceptive. They're lying to you. They really are. Now, back to your question. Should an employer have the right to impact upon your free speech? Well, obviously, yes, to a degree. Because if you bring the organisation's reputation into disrepute, then that's unacceptable. Because an organisation, its future is almost entirely dependent on its reputation. But this was not of that sort. This was a privately held belief. Everybody understood it was a privately held belief. And away you go. Because if a corporation can control every aspect of your life, you've gone back to medieval times where you're a serf, where your entire life and livelihood is now dependent on the Lord and Master. Well, that's completely unacceptable. So there's an intelligent debate to be had about this. Yes, an employee cannot destroy the reputation of the organisation for whom he or she works. But by the same token, it cannot be so draconian that we now must sit quietly in our cubicles, meekly filling our work assignments out and not having the ability to say what we want. Because if a company is rotten, then we ought to hit them where it hurts and say, you know what, this company's bad. Don't buy their product, because they love using their corporate power on us. And we have the same. Once again, the ants can link arms and say to any company that's doing strange things, inexplicably supporting halal, for example. Why are you supporting halal and not supporting Christmas? Why are you putting happy Ramadan Kareem, which is Happy Ramadan, up in your shops, but you won't put up Happy Easter?
Sure. Well, let me put this hypothetical to you.
Sure.
Let's say we had Sonny Bill Williams, a Muslim, let's say he was playing in the NRL or something.
Yeah.
He puts up on his Instagram a Quran verse, which says like a wife must submit to her husband, something like this, right? And NRL doesn't like it. NRL says you can't play anymore.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, do you think?
I don't think the NRL would do that. But anyway, go on.
Well, the NRL has said that they're not going to have Folau. They're not going to accept Folau back in, right? So I'm asking you, would you take the same principled approach to defend like a Muslim if they found themselves in a similar situation? Or is this like particular to Christianity?
Okay, we're going to get in a really sensitive area here, and I'm happy to wade in boots and all. Okay, freedom of religion. Is Islam a religion? That's a really good question, because it's part religion and part world conquest ideology. Now, 91 times in the Quran, Muslims are told to kill the kafir, and the kafir are non-Muslims. I can't remember Jesus saying that. So we get to choose what is a religion and what's not. Because if someone turns up and says, you know, I have a religion and I have to kill dogs on a Sunday on my front step, and that's what my religion says, we just reject it out of hand, because it's nonsense. Well, if you look into Islam, it's got a pretty terrible history. 1,400 years this place has been running, Islam. 1,400 years, unbroken. The Caliphate, which started with Muhammad in 635, ended in 1924. And I bet you your listeners don't know that. And it ended with the Ottoman Empire when Mustafa Kemal Ataturk decided to turn Turkey, which was the remnants of the Ottoman Empire, into a secular country. So the real question is Islam a religion? Because freedom of speech, up to a point, I'm a freedom of speech extremist. But having people say, I'm going to kill you, is different to saying you're going to go to hell. One's a belief about a future life. This is what I'm going to do to you right now. So there is no moral equivalency between Christianity and Islam. And I'm happy to take anybody on here. And I'll give you a chapter and verse. In fact, it's called the surah in the Quran. It's not called chapter and verse in the Bible. It's called the surah. And I'll go surah for surah with anybody to explain to you why there is no moral equivalency between Islam and Christianity.
Okay. What would you be willing to say about, if we're just doing an analysis of the text, what would you say about Judaism and the Torah?
That's in historical context. That's 2,000 years old. The context...
1,400 years old, 2,000, not a huge difference.
Yeah, but the thinking's medieval. It's huge, the difference. See, there's a difference between the Bible and the Quran. The Bible has an historical context because it's chronological. But the Quran isn't. The Quran has been rearranged. The surahs have been rearranged to go according to length. So there's no logical sequence to it. Mm-hmm. It's nonsense. It's designed to be indecipherable. It's designed to be difficult to understand.
Do you understand? I have significant reservation about one group of people deciding whether a different group of people's beliefs cannot or can be determined as a religion, and then having a bunch of policy prescriptions that come from that, right? So I'd say there's probably quite a lot of people, even in Canberra, which wouldn't, well let's say just in general, right? There's quite a lot of people who would kind of believe Christianity it doesn't hold an iota of truth in it, right? Now, I don't think we'd like them deciding that Christianity is not a religion. I think that's dangerous. Don't you think we should, like, I'm finding it hard to understand where you're coming from a little bit, but...
That's okay. Let me get that one for you, because you've really nailed on a deep point here, which will take a while to get through, and it's worthy of a discussion in and of its own right. But first of all, this. Just so you know where I'm coming from when I speak of Islam, I've lived and worked in Middle Eastern countries for years and years and years, many of them. So I have a lived experience of this. This isn't just some idea that I have. I've lived and worked with these people backwards, and we'll do a section on Islam one day if you want. So it's a lived experience. Point number 2, and this is great because people speak as if there is some pure ideology to which we must hold ourselves. Now, that only exists in one place. Now, the word, we have a right to do this, and they have a right to practice their religion. We have a right to free speech. We have a right to... Here's the question that every listener has to come up and answer to themselves. What is the origin of that right? Now think about that for a minute. What's the origin of that right? Is it because a bunch of people agreed? Well, that's just the mob. That's the mob rule. Let's say, theoretically, 25 million Australians decide we have the right to set the laws as we choose, and the laws include no polygamy. Right? No problem. We open up the borders, and 26 million Indonesians wander down and fill the country. And 26 million Muslims then turn around and say, well, we decide that we have a right to polygamy. See, you have to work out for yourself where your rights come from. What's the origin of the right? Because if it's just mob rule, that's not a right, that's an opinion. And this word is thrown around, it's bandied around. And I understand your discomfort, and you should feel discomfort because you and everybody else has to make a decision in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Either we choose how this country is shaped or somebody else will. And you can use the excuse, well, it's a human right, as determined by whom? The UN? Okay, let me tell you about the UN. The largest voting bloc in the United Nations is called the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. 57 Muslim states run the UN. Now, do you think for a minute that human rights, and they love that expression, that human rights matter? Well, they don't, because the OIC signed up to what's called the Cairo Declaration. If you want to look this one up, paragraphs 24 and 25, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is subject to Sharia law. Gosh. Now, what does that tell you? What it means is the UN is run by the Muslims, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which we are required to adhere to, lest we be torn down by the UN, the Muslim countries don't, because it is subject to Sharia law. So you're applying a level of a stricture on us that they're not playing by the same rules. So you can't say, well, who are we to say that Islam's not a religion? I am me. I have the authority vested in me by my right. What right's that? The one I say I've got, because you say you've got a right, so do I. Let's fight it out and see who wins. But if you want to be... And that's a personal decision you're going to have to come up with. I've got my answer where the rights come from, but everyone has to make up their own mind. But the Islamists and the Muslims are playing by one set of rules and compelling us to play by another, and our cowardly and treasonous politicians either don't know or they do know, but they're forcing us to play by the same rules. So I have every right to say Islam's not a religion. It's about 5% religion, maybe. The 5 pillars of Islam, zakat, the Hajj. This is giving charity or doing the Hajj or whatever it is. You can do that, but let me tell you where that came from. First 12 years of Muhammad's preaching, he was in Mecca. And after 12 years, he had something like 150 followers. No great shakes. His own family thought he was a fool. He got jack of that, to use an Australian expression. And he went to Medina, where he pulled out a sword and said, convert or die. And all of a sudden, he had the world's most popular religion, which was based on raiding caravans and killing the Kafir and taking their gold and buying slaves. That's the origin of this great religion. This great religion is responsible for 120 million deaths or something, some ridiculous number, insane number. 80 million Hindus. 80 million Hindus died in India. Afghanistan used to be Buddhist. This is not a religion. This is a death cult. Now, I'm not talking about Muslims. I'm talking about Islam. So I have every right to say, based on my experience and my knowledge of the religion, it's not a religion. It's something else. So Sonny Bill and Israel Folau, false equivalency. I'm really sorry, Dougal, but it is a false equivalency. Telling me that he's going to cut off my daughter's head because she doesn't believe, she insults the Prophet, that's different to saying to a grown man, you shouldn't drink and smoke and carry on.
Sure. In the question, though, if Sonny Bill Williams said a wife must submit to her husband, right? We would say that today is probably unacceptable. As a social thing, I think most people would say that. Some people might disagree. But if the NRL or some rugby organisation was to take action on that, I'd be like, you can do your thing in the same way to the ARU. I'd say about Folau, you can do your thing. That's my natural position on it. Which, and that's not like a religious thing. That's as far as I can tell. That's a privacy thing.
Understood.
Do you have like what's your reaction? What's your reaction to that?
They should leave them both alone. If it wasn't the Islam thing, I think that's, a woman should submit to her husband. If he wants to say that, fill your boots. I have no problem. It's the Islam thing that's the problem. See, we've got two people allegedly. One will say one thing, one says the other. I might find them both offensive. I might find them both utterly acceptable. But that hasn't brought the organisation into disrepute. That brings his own reputation potentially introduced into disrepute, or it enhances it either way. But the organisation isn't affected by it, to my mind, at all. So if he wants to say that, if someone says, I want to kill the kafir, you might want to start having a think about it, not because it's a religious thing, because it's just violence. Okay, so again, separate the religion aspect to it. If they say things that are unpleasant, they can wear that. But to conflate the religious aspect to it is the problem, because Christianity always gets it in the gonads and Islam always gets a pass. So they're trying to conflate two false issues here. You got to see where I'm going with this thing? Yeah. So the statement is one thing, and the other statement is another thing. And that can be judged on its own merits. But to cloak the Christianity one as one that needs to be beaten up, and the other one potentially, I bet you they wouldn't say a thing about Islam, ever. I mean, ACT has they have the laws, anti-religious vilification laws. That sounds very good. You can't vilify somebody, define that for me. It's like hate. But you can't vilify somebody based on their religion. Okay? What people don't realise, the next step is blasphemy. And we've had our head of ASIO, Duncan Lewis, actually say, well, blasphemy, I'm not going to pass comment on religions because that's blasphemy. Are you kidding me? Blasphemy laws, Australia, 21st century? Please. It's this creeping advance. That's the problem. But again, just to get back to your point, if they want to say things that are unpleasant and the impact on its employer, that should be looked at its own merits. Just don't wrap it up in the Christian Islamic issue, because that is a whole different ballgame. And that's why I went into quite some detail about the nature of Islam, because there is no moral equivalency between Islam and Christianity. The carpenter's son was a shepherd. The other bloke was a warlord.
Well, would you defend the Old Testament?
In what way?
Well, the New Testament, as far as I'm aware, is quite a bit nicer than the Old Testament in a range of ways. But the proposition put forward by the Christians is that it's the same God.
Yeah.
It's the same God.
Yeah.
So would you be willing to defend the Old Testament in the same way you'd defend...
I see what you're getting to. Okay, right. I can't see bands of marauding Jews killing people around the planet at the moment. We don't have a terror problem based on Old Testament that the Jews are executing against the planet.
Sure.
We do with Islam. So context is everything. We can have a group of people that believe anything, but if it doesn't impact on us, it's no big deal. That's free speech. Believe what you want to believe, say what you want to say. Does it impact on us? Not really.
Sure.
But if you've got somebody, as you said it yourself, incitement to violence, because that's all the Quran is, 91 times.
Well, I think that's a nice segue.